whispers in the vale. Night draped its velvet cloak over Stranglethorn Vale, soft and oppressive. The jungle pulsed with quiet life, chirps, rustles, distant cries, but within the thick, towering ferns silence reigned. A lone rogue, cloaked in shadow, crouched low, unseen, waiting. His mission was clear: disrupt and dismantle the Alliance presence in this strategic choke point known to both factions as Rebel Camp. Lee slipped silently across a narrow jungle path. Nearby, 2 young Horde warriors were mock dueling, their wooden weapons clacking in playful competition. He offered one a brief nod, just enough to signal camaraderie before slipping back into cover. His destination: a concealed perch overlooking the path, where a crooked coconut palm curved invitingly over the trail like a serpent poised to strike, the perfect ambush point. Now, there was nothing to do but wait. The shadows grew deeper. Lee was alone, except for his thoughts. Suddenly, the brush rustled and a figure emerged, a Horde paladin. Warily at first, the two exchanged words. Soon, it became clear that the paladin and the young warrior from earlier had been dispatched by their guild to hold this pass. Recognizing kindred spirits and shared purpose, they invited Lee to join their watch. He agreed without hesitation. The paladin was easygoing and sharp, his armor dusty but proud. Conversation turned to the enemy. Lee ranted about the Alliance's lack of imagination, their obsession with paladins and death knights, while neglecting the art of subtlety. The paladin chuckled and countered that the Horde had its own flaw: a chronic shortage of healers. Lee laughed. "The Horde's allergic to healers," he said. Their shared laughter rolled through the trees like distant thunder. It wasn't long before trouble came striding down the path. A human paladin, smug, radiant in high-tier armor and reeking of overconfidence, strolled into view. His self-importance was as heavy as his gear. "What a dandy," muttered Lee, sneering from the shadows. They toyed with him at first, amused by his unnatural healing abilities, no doubt bolstered by enchanted equipment. But amusement soon gave way to action. They took him down, but not before he cried out, summoning aid from his grotesquely powerful guild. Soon, a full Alliance strike team arrived, 5 strong. As expected, death knights and healers, predictable, arrogant. Lee signaled for his team to vanish into the hills. The Alliance players taunted the empty path, convinced their enemies had fled in fear. But Lee was patient, and patient predators strike. From the shadows, Lee noticed one of the Alliance wander away from his group. Careless, bored, alone. That was enough. Lee pounced, a blur of steel and shadow. In seconds, the rogue had eviscerated his target, leaving only a stunned gasp in the jungle air. Before the others could react, the Horde paladin and the druid leapt from the foliage like twin beasts of war, smashing into the enemy line. Chaos erupted, spells collided, steel clashed. One by one, the allies broke and ran, screeching for reinforcements. But it was too late. Rebel Camp had become a war zone, overrun by an endless stream of Alliance reinforcements flooding in. Too many, too fast. Lee grinned and clapped his comrades on the back. "Mission accomplished," he said, voice low. "Time to vanish." The others retreated into the hills, their laughter echoing like war drums behind them, but Lee remained, hidden, still. He crouched in the jungle, watching the camp now swollen with enemies. This was the true strike, one final act of violence, soaked in bad intentions and born of war. It wasn't strategy, it was vengeance. From the foliage, Lee launched himself like a living blade and struck another paladin down, stopping just an inch before the kill. The paladin's allies roared in fury, descending upon the rogue with a torrent of spells and steel, but they hit nothing. Lee had already melted into the night. Spells exploded harmlessly against the jungle, deflected by the shrouded magic of Cloak of Shadows. He was gone. Only dust remained. And then, cutting through the silence, sending a chill up every spine, came a sound, a rogue's laughter, echoing like a phantom through the pass of rebel camp. Echoes of the Empire. The dense canopy of Stranglethorn Vale swayed gently in the morning breeze, casting long, flickering shadows across the worn jungle path. As Lee made his way toward his usual patrol grounds, his footsteps slowed. Not from fatigue, but reverence. He passed faces, not living ones, but carved in stone, etched into towering monoliths that had stood vigil for millennia. These were not allies in arms, but silent remnants of a long-vanished age. The Gurubashi Empire, a once mighty dominion of jungle trolls, now reduced to legend and ruin. The massive stone visages depicted warriors long dead, or serpent gods whose names were lost to time. They watched Lee with sightless eyes, and he wondered. What did they dream of, these ancient ones? What thoughts filled their minds as they walked these shores so long ago? Modern trolls still inhabited the jungle, descendants of those long-gone titans. Yet in Lee's eyes they were a pale echo, savage, disjointed, scattered. Compared to their noble forebears, they were children playing in the bones of giants. Turning on a whim, Lee decided to cross eastward toward the ruins. There, he hoped to find a certain old troll, the only one he'd ever met in these parts who could read or write, even a little. A fisherman by trade, the ancient troll kept to himself, living in a primitive camp amidst the shattered columns of his ancestors' temples. Lee had always sensed that the old man carried within him the weight of stories long untold. As predicted, he found the elder hunched over a crude fire, tending to a bubbling pot of fish stew. Smoke coiled into the jungle air. "Greetings," Lee said, tossing a few copper coins near the old man's feet. "Go ahead, old man. Tell me a tale." The troll looked up slowly, his face a weathered map of creases and scars. His eyes shimmered with a mixture of gratitude and contempt, as though uncertain whether to curse Lee or thank him. Then, as if plucking thoughts from Lee's mind, the old man began to speak, not in grunts or broken phrases, but in a quiet, rhythmic cadence, strangely articulate. And so, Lee listened, spellbound. 1,500 years before the dark portal opened, the old man began, staring into the fire. The Gurubashi Empire was mighty, until it tore itself apart in civil war. Lee leaned forward as the tale unfolded like an ancient scroll. A sect of powerful priests, drunk on ambition, called forth an avatar of a terrible blood god, Hakar the Soul Flayer. They called themselves the Hakari, and their power was unlike anything the jungle had seen. Many trolls, seduced by this strength, joined their cause. With blood magic on their side, the Hakari crushed their enemies, Null clans, Murloc tribes, and even trolls who resisted Hakar's dark influence. The jungle seemed to grow quieter, as though even the birds paused to listen. Under Hakar's bloody banner, they expanded, conquering distant islands and territories across the South Seas. Their dreams became reality. Power surged through them like a river of fire, but power comes at a cost. The old man stirred the fire absently. The Zandalari, firstborn of Trollkind, watched from afar. At first, they were pleased to see the Gurubashi return to conquest, to worship, but soon they saw the truth. Hakar's hunger was insatiable. He would not stop until the world itself bled. Lee remained silent, his breath held. The Zandalari acted. They gathered allies, sailing to the eastern kingdoms where they met dissenting Gurubashi trolls who had hidden their loyalty to the old ways. Together, they discovered the darkest truth yet. A faction of Hakar's most fanatical priests, the Atali, were preparing to summon the blood god fully into the world, not just spirit, but flesh. He looked up at Lee, his eyes now fierce. That would have meant the end, not just of trolls, but of all life. Lee felt a chill. So they marched. The Zandalari, their Gurubashi allies, stormed Zul'Gurub itself. Battles raged day and night among the vine-choked ziggurats. Blood soaked the altars. Screams echoed through the stone. And finally, atop Hakar's own shrine, the Zandalari struck the final blow. Hakar's avatar was cast down, his cult destroyed. He paused. But not all of them died. The fire snapped. A handful of Atalai priests escaped, slithering into the jungles like venomous snakes. They made their way north, into the Swamp of Sorrows, where they built a hidden temple in the marsh, the Temple of Atal Hakar. There, in shadow and secrecy, they plot still, praying for the return of their monstrous god. The old man's voice faded with the fire. Lee sat in stunned silence, the jungle around them now darker, deeper somehow. "Why tell me this?" he finally asked. The old troll shrugged. "Because someone should remember." And with that, he returned to his cooking, as if centuries of blood and fire were no more than idle smoke on the wind. Lee crouched once more upon his familiar perch, the canopy of the Stranglethorn jungle stretching endlessly around him, a wild, living sea of green. His thoughts drifted unbidden to the first time he had been deployed to these accursed southern wilds, dispatched by his guild in Orgrimmar to the suffocating heat and buzzing misery of the southeastern kingdoms. He had loathed it then, the sweltering humidity, the insects that feasted on exposed flesh, the ceaseless curtain of tropical rain that soaked his leather armor until it clung to him like a second moldy skin. But orders were orders, and over days, then weeks, then months, the jungle did something strange to him. It wore him down, yes, but it also tempered him, hardened him. Now he had returned to the same place where it all began. still stalking the same paths, still ambushing Alliance intruders foolish enough to tread this way. Only now, he did it not because he had to, but because it was who he had become. Sometimes, in the long hours between the kill and the next shadowed stalk, he asked himself, what is it all for? He had fought in grand raids across Alliance lands, from the pastoral hills of Goldshire to the very gates of Stormwind City itself. He had spilled blood beneath their banners and returned to Orgrimmar cloaked in honour and the whispers of awe. But even then, surrounded by comrades, Lee had felt something missing. It wasn't camaraderie he craved. If anything, he realized he worked best alone. In truth, many in his guild respected his skill, but they feared him more than they trusted him, and that suited him just fine. Eventually, he had volunteered, without hesitation, for the long, lonely task of reconnaissance. The wilds of Stranglethorn welcomed him back like an old, jagged friend. For years now, he had travelled back and forth, riding the airship from Orgrimmar over open seas, a 3-day journey to the steaming heart of the jungle. But more recently, he had stopped making the return trip. Stranglethorn had become his haunt, his hunting ground, his home. Everything he needed he took. Supplies looted from the fallen, Alliance corpses stripped of coin, gear, and rations. The trolls of Gromgol Outpost, crude but dependable allies, offered smoked meat, fermented brew, and foraged fruit in exchange for favours or stolen trinkets. It was enough. This narrow stretch of land, from the red-stained soil of Gromgol to the precarious outpost of Rebel Camp, he had claimed it as his own. Over time, the jungle that once seemed like an enemy became something else. Not quite a friend, not quite a master, but something close. A mirror, a reflection of himself, brutal, silent, and unforgiving. 90% of Lee's job was waiting for the telltale shuffle of boots on gravel, waiting for the glint of armor to betray movement through the jungle foliage, waiting for Alliance combatant to wander too close to the edge of their patrols, close enough for a dagger's kiss. When he had first begun training as a rogue under the cold, withering gaze of his forsaken instructor, Lee had despised the stillness. Patience was anathema to him then. He had been a coiled spring, always on edge, always needing to move. Sitting still had felt like drowning. But over the years the jungle had taught him the rhythm of stillness. The body, with enough practice, slipped into a state of controlled dormancy, a kind of idle mode where breath slowed and muscle tension faded, but awareness remained razor sharp, a trance almost. Relaxed yet ready, alert yet invisible. Most battles, especially those fought in the shadows, were decided in the first few heartbeats. For a rogue, the opening moment was everything. That was when Lee would know, intuitively, instinctively, whether he would win or be forced to melt into the shadows once again. Veteran Alliance fighters often had that same predator's intuition. The good ones, anyway. They might flinch but recovered fast, spinning to counterattack or popping defenses in the blink of an eye. But the green ones, the overconfident or the careless, those were easy prey. They froze, startled by the sudden violence. They fumbled for their spells or weapons, and by then it was already too late. Even the seasoned ones, though, they still needed a second, just half a heartbeat, a moment for the brain to catch up to what the body had just realized. I'm under attack. And in that sliver of hesitation, Lee thrived. His ambushes were swift, brutal, and disorienting, overwhelming the senses before the mind could even register what was happening. He didn't just kill his enemies, he unraveled them. They died not just from his twin daggers, but from panic, from chaos, from fear. That was his real weapon. Not steel, not stealth, but a mind game. At the outset of his mission, when he was first dispatched to the Vale, Lee had spared little thought for his surroundings. The jungle had been nothing more than cover, thick foliage to conceal his strikes, vines and shadows to cloak his movement. But months of waiting, of stalking through the endless green, had begun to shift something in him. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he had started to look deeper. Now, when he passed the ancient stone visages half swallowed by moss and time, he found himself staring back. Who were they, these forgotten masters of the jungle? What songs had they sung? What gods had they served? And why had their empire crumbled into ruin? He could not shake the memory of the tale old Uthrak, the weathered troll elder, recently told him beside a guttering fire. A tale of blood rites and fallen kings, of demon gods that whispered from the swamps. The story had taken root in Lee's mind, and since then, his hunger for the history of his adopted home had only grown. Someday, if the war allowed him the luxury, he would make the journey to Zul'Gurub, the legendary capital of the Gurubashi Empire. The old story spoke of treasure beyond reckoning hidden in its depths, luring wanderers and treasure hunters like moths to flame. But for Lee, the lure went beyond gold. He wanted to also see the swamp of sorrows with his own eyes, to peer into the murky waters where, if Uthrak's words held any truth, the scions of a demon god still plotted in the dark. Were they truly there? And if so, was there profit to be had in hunting them? Someone, somewhere in this realm surely still cared what became them. Surely their hide was worth something. One day, Lee promised himself, one day he would find out. The unit, 10 years ago, city of Orgrimmar. Come on, Gar. We need to register at the Horde Embassy, said Lee, leading the way from Orgrimmar's massive front gate toward one of the many leather and wood huts nestled within the capital's inner ring. Like most buildings in Orgrimmar, it was simple, brutal, and built to last. At the entrance, they were met by Urtran the Guildmaster, a weathered orc whose expression seemed permanently carved from granite. Even in peace, he rumbled, there is still war. Clans still fight under the Warchief's banner. Are you here to add your name to those ranks? Not exactly, Lee replied with a raised brow, glancing at the gaunt figure beside him. Gar, the insane. An undead warlock with sunken, glowing eyes and a presence that made even the boldest pause. They had met during a campaign in Stranglethorn Vale. A conversation sparked, one that had quickly evolved into something more. Shared ideals, a common hatred for the Alliance, and a similar hunger for vengeance. Yes, Gar cut in, voice dry with mock solemnity. We are. Urtran looked briefly puzzled, then nodded, seemingly satisfied. To form a guild, you must first purchase a charter, he said, holding out a rolled parchment. Then gather 9 unique signatures and return it to me for approval. What shall your guild be called? Unit X, Lee answered without hesitation. As they stepped back into the sun-scorched streets of Orgrimmar, Gar gave a crooked smile. The signatures won't be a problem. My friends await us at the auction house. The two walked in silence for a time, the dust rising at their feet. Orgrimmar bustled around them, grunts training in the drag, goblins haggling, wyverns screeching overhead, but Lee's thoughts were elsewhere. He didn't like most people in the Horde. Too many blowhards, too many zealots. But Gar was different. It wasn't what the undead warlock had said when they first met that left an impression. It was what he hadn't said. The quiet fury in his eyes, the scars he didn't bother to explain, his single-minded thirst for revenge, for justice in a world that rarely gave it. Lee had felt the same. Maybe that's why it made sense. The unit, Gar had mused back in Stranglethorn, standing on a rocky overlook above the jungle canopy, watching the mist roll in from the sea. Let's call it Unit X, Lee had replied. Unit X, Gar had repeated softly, as if sealing a pact. A guild for vengeance. And profit, Lee had finished with a rare grin. 2 years on the unit had exploded in the battlefield scene. Unit X carved out territory for the Horde, amassed wealth through raids and conquest, and even stormed the very gates of Stormwind in a siege that became the stuff of tavern tales. Its banners flew from the Barrens to the Blade's Edge Mountains. Hundreds now marched under its name. Gar, once a mad-eyed warlock wandering the wilds, had evolved into a charismatic and disciplined leader. He assigned missions with surgical precision, organized assaults that defied odds, and led from the front with spells that melted minds and shattered defenses. Lee had watched this transformation with quiet observation. Though he said little, he understood what it took to carry the weight of a guild that had become both warband and famous. Many waited in line to join, eager to go through the hardships of initiation. That evening, near the rebel camp in Stranglethorn Vale, a 10-man raid team rested around the campfire, sharpening blades, laughing between sips of cactus wine, and engaging in friendly duels to kill time. "Who's next?" Gar called out, standing amid them like a dark priest of war. A sly smile played on his pale lips. The others exchanged wary glances. No one wanted a beating that night. "I'll go," said Lee, standing from the shadows at the edge of the clearing. The camp went quiet. All heads turned toward him. A hushed awe rippled through the group. "Yeah," one of the younger warriors roared. "You go, Commander!" A few others joined in, though many eyed Lee with a mixture of admiration and wariness. He was an enigma, silent, efficient, deadly. Some knew he was a founding member of Unit X, others didn't. But all of them understood one thing. Gar, their fearless leader, showed him rare respect. That alone made Lee untouchable. The duel began. Lee melted into the shadows with practiced ease. Gar summoned his succubus, a cruelly beautiful demoness who excelled at seduction and sudden stuns. A perfect choice. Always the tactician, Lee thought. The others leaned forward, grinning, breath held as anticipation built. A heartbeat passed. Then too, Gar, usually calm as moonlight, began to shift slightly, his stance adjusting, eyes scanning. Lee grinned in the dark. Then, from the undergrowth, an explosion of fury. Steel flashed like lightning. In a blink, Lee struck. Gar staggered as slashes carved away 1/3 of his life force, but the succubus reacted instantly, hissing with glee as she stunned Lee mid-move, breaking the rhythm of the rogue's blitz. Gar rallied, draining Lee's life with a flick of his fingers. The warlock's crimson siphon pulsed in the humid jungle air. Lee faltered, vision narrowing. Then, with a practiced flick, he triggered his trinket. The fog lifted. Focus returned. In an instant, Lee's shadow stepped behind Gar and unleashed a brutal flurry of eviscerating strikes. Gasps erupted around the camp. Never had they seen anything like it, and never had they seen Gar, the indomitable, brought so close to defeat. But Gar was not finished. His succubus kept up the assault, stunning Lee again, denying him the advantage of stealth. Gar's hands weaved spells laced with agony, corruption, fire. Lee's vision blurred, life slipping away. And still he endured. With a last reserve of will, Lee blinded Gar, a flash of disruption in the night. Then, igniting his nitro boots, he vanished into the jungle, trailing sparks and shadow. Silence. Both combatants were left hanging by a thread, battered and barely standing. The duel was over. "A draw," yelled one of the hunters reverently. A cheer erupted. The jungle echoed with their voices, wild and proud. Victory or no, they had just witnessed something rare. The jungle drank their enthusiasm. But years had now passed, 5 since the creation of the guild. Time had passed, as it always did, slow and heavy as jungle fog. The world had changed, and Lee had begun to feel encumbered. Where once the thrill of raids had stirred his blood, now they felt more like obligation than passion. The logistics, the endless chatter, the coordination of egos and ambition. It had begun to wear on him. More and more, he found solace not in groups, but in solitude, alone in the jungle, stalking his prey under the heavy canopy, where no one questioned him, and every strike was clean and justified. Gar, too, had changed. The warlock who had once been a kindred spirit, sharp, intense, and attuned to Lee's quiet moods, had become something else entirely, a figurehead, a celebrity, a leader of a sprawling war machine. No longer was he the comrade who shared quiet thoughts over firelight. Now he was an administrator, surrounded by crowds and councils, always with another decision to make. The guild had grown beyond them both. Gar had assumed undisputed command of Unit X. He had built a council of 4 elders to govern the day-to-day decisions. Who would be recruited? Who would be cast out? For the sake of respect, Gar had named Lee an honorary member of the council. Unofficially, Lee was still regarded by many as the second in command, and Lee had accepted that. He had never sought leadership. Gar had done the work, organizing raids, managing resources, holding the lines together. That role had come to him naturally, and Lee never contested it. His own position, quiet but powerful, suited him. When necessary, he could call upon a squad of Unit X's finest to respond within moments. Many Alliance fighters had paid with their lives for underestimating the rogue who walked alone. Yes, Lee was content. Until the message arrived. He had been perched atop a cliff near the rebel camp, watching for his next mark, when the magical missive blinked across his thoughts. A summons. The council had called a moot. All members of Unit X, by rule, were bound to attend, and this one bore the seal of the Guildmaster. Urgent matter. Assembly required in Orgrimmar. 3 days later, Lee stood in the Valley of Honor, beneath the shadow of spiked towers and crimson banners. They had gathered in a semicircle atop the red stone platform. Gar stood at the center, his usual composure veiled beneath a solemn mask. At his flanks sat the council, a hunter, a priest, a warrior, and Lee. "Lee," Gar began, voice low and grave, "I regret to inform you that the 4 members of the council have voted for your demotion." Lee said nothing, his gaze held steady. "You don't do anything," the hunter blurted, seeking Gar's validation, but the warlock turned his head away. Emboldened, the hunter continued, "There's work to be done, real work, and it's not fair that someone like you sits in that seat while others more active, are sidelined." "So the chicken crows before the rooster," Lee interrupted, his voice a blade wrapped in silk.
The hunter flinched and sat back, but Lee was not finished. His anger surged, not wild and loud, but cold and tidal. "You arrogant fools," he said, his voice low. "Do you even know who built this guild?" His fury crashed, but it did not burn. It rolled like thunder, ancient and earned. But then he looked at Gar, and he had realized that Gar was not looking at him. In fact, he seemed so cold, so distant. Lee's fury ebbed, crashing like a mighty ocean wave upon the face of a proud rock. The warlock's face was drawn, his eyes burdened. He would not meet Lee's gaze. Something in Lee's chest hollowed. "I see," Lee said finally. His voice was softer now, nearly a whisper. "So this is how it is." He stood slowly. "I will withdraw immediately. My tabard will be returned by dawn." He turned to go. "Wait, Lee," Gar called out. This isn't what I wanted. My hand was forced. The council—" "Please," Lee said, lifting one hand, his back still turned. "My decision is made." He glanced back once at the council, his expression one of cold pity. Then to Gar he said, "It seems, old friend, that you now face a rebellion in your house. I hadn't realized the council could speak over the voice of the guildmaster." Gar said nothing. Lee said no more. With his chin lifted and his shoulders straight, he walked away, through the gates of Orgrimmar, through the noise and heat and life of the city. He did not look back.
Beneath the Sigil. Balbina urged her azure drake northward, the icy winds of Northrend whipping through her dark hair as she ascended toward the looming shadow of ice-crowned citadel. The bleak spires pierced the heavens like the fangs of some ancient beast, but she had no intention of lingering near that cursed place. Once within sight of its blighted walls, she would bank eastward, toward the floating city of Dalaran and the scent of power that now awaited her. A slow, satisfied smile curled her lips. It was almost laughable how swiftly things had turned in her favor. Barely 6 moons had passed since she'd first set foot in the ranks of Unit X, a rising operative with a glint in her eye. And now she flew as a newly appointed member of the Council of Four, the Guild's most elite governing body, second only to the Guildmaster himself. She had replaced the elven hunter Fastwind, of course. A pity, truly. He had been loyal, skilled, and utterly unprepared to face her brand of warfare. The charges of treason? Entirely fabricated, but the Council had believed her without hesitation. Balbina had presented her forged evidence with the right tone of urgency, the correct measure of sorrow in her eyes, and most importantly, she had played to the ambitions and fears of the others, weaving doubts where there had been none before. Fastwind hadn't stood a chance. Her laugh echoed lightly against the dragon's scaled neck. Seduction, guile, manipulation, the same old tools polished and sharpened over years of practice. In the end, it hadn't mattered what was true, only what people could be made to believe. And now, she was on the cusp of her first gathering as one of the 4 elders. Her? An elder? The word tickled her pride. She let out a quiet, delighted hum, almost girlish despite the chill that bit at her cheeks. "Well," she murmured to herself, adjusting the fur-lined collar of her cloak, "who could ask for a more charming elder than me?" The drake gave a soft growl beneath her, wings slicing through the clouds as Dalaran shimmered into view. Power awaited, and Balbina had never looked more ready to claim it.
Gar sat in still silence atop the obsidian-inlaid throne, a modest but commanding seat positioned at the heart of the Horde Embassy's quarters in Dalaran. The chamber, purchased through the overflowing coffers of Unit X, was adorned with crimson tapestries bearing the guild's emblem, and the floor gleamed with polished stone. It was not only luxurious, but symbolic, a visual testament to the power of the guild, a fitting seat for the guildmaster of Unit X, now among the most influential organizations under the Horde's banner, and at its helm, Gar the Insane. He leaned forward, drumming thick ring-laden fingers along the armrest, eyes flicking toward the arched doors at the far end of the room. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice low and unimpressed. The orc to his right, broad-shouldered and clad in battered plate, gave a respectful nod. Hogar the Indomitable was not one to be easily shaken, but even he treaded carefully in the presence of the guildmaster. "My lord," he began with measured calm, "she is expected to arrive at any moment." "She is already late," Gar replied, tone flat and devoid of humor. "I can hardly call this impressive, especially when she is meant to inherit the station once held by the likes of Fast Wind, not to speak of Lee." At the mention of those names, the air grew subtly colder. Legends within the guild, now departed or disgraced. "She will be here, my lord," came a smooth, confident voice from the robed figure on Gar's left. Mahim, the shrewd Forsaken priest, dipped his head slightly. "I have no doubt she will prove herself an asset. Her loyalty is unquestionable, I can personally attest." Gar turned his gaze slowly toward the priest, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. For a heartbeat, silence hung like a blade suspended in air. "We shall see," he said at last. Then the sound of boots, metal on stone, began to echo through the marble hall, a rhythmic, purposeful march that grew louder with each step. The guards by the doors snapped to attention. A herald's voice rang out, crisp and ceremonial. "Your lordship, I present to you her munificence, Council Master Balbina Greypeak, the Hunter." The doors opened with a heavy groan, and into the chamber strode a vision of cold elegance. "Enter," Gar said simply. His tone did not welcome, it tested. Gar barely inclined his head in Balbina's direction, a gesture so minimal it bordered on dismissive. He made no effort to conceal his disinterest as his gaze drifted over the striking figure before him. She was undeniably arresting, her blood-elven heritage lending her an almost ethereal allure. Emerald eyes shimmered with quiet calculation beneath long lashes, and her high cheekbones and pointed ears framed a face both regal and dangerously enigmatic. Her long legs were clad in form-fitting leather of smoke grey and onyx, and her slender waist was cinched by a matching cuirass, sleek and supple, designed as much for movement as for aesthetic intimidation. Slung across her back was a gold-inlaid recurved bow, a weapon of exquisite craftsmanship. At her side, a vivid blue bird of paradise perched with unnatural stillness, its gleaming feathers catching the torchlight like living jewels. Its eyes, intelligent, sharp, hinted at an unseen lethality, likely mirroring that of its mistress. "Well then," Gar drawled, tone heavy with wearied sarcasm, "the order of the day, I suppose, is the departure of our dear traitor Fastwind. A bothersome affair, really, and now we're left to clean up the mess." He shifted in his seat, expression flat. "For all his faults, Fastwind was tireless. He managed guild recruitment, handled the tithe fees, and those fees were not unimportant. Annoying though he was, the man did his part."
A soft voice cut in, smooth as satin. but edged with steel. "Permit me the insolence of interruption, my lord," Balbina said, with a faint tilt of her head. "But it was precisely in his eagerness to collect those ties where his flaws took root. One may pay the orc geld, as they say, but one rarely rids oneself of the orc."
A sudden bark of laughter slipped from Mahim. He quickly stifled it, but not quickly enough. Gar turned his gaze toward him, cold and sharp as a dagger's edge. The priest silenced at once, lowering his eyes. Then, slowly, Gar turned to Balbina. For the first time, he truly looked at her, his dark eyes locked with hers, studying her not as an ornament, but as a player on the board. His lip curled faintly. "How very poetic, Miss Balbina," he said, voice low and dry. "Is this your grand contribution to the guild, then? Pretty metaphors and clever jabs."
Balbina lifted her chin, feigning offence. "Hardly, my lord. I am here to serve, and, if necessary, to patch the holes left behind by traitors and incompetence."
That time Mahim let out an audible snort. Hogar's gravelly chuckle followed soon after. To everyone's surprise, Gar did not silence them. Instead, a slow grin began to pull at the corners of his mouth, like a storm momentarily staying its hand. "Welcome to the council, Miss Balbina," he said at last. "I pray your tongue proves less sharp than your blade. We are not in need of jesters." He rose, turning away toward the long stone table set at the center of the room. "Now, take your seat. We have work to do." "Speaking of incompetence." The voice came from nowhere and everywhere at once, cold as grave soil, slithering from the shadows like a dagger in the dark. Mahim let out a startled gasp and nearly toppled from his chair, clutching at his chest as if warding off a spectre. Even Hogar, veteran of 1,000 battlefields, stiffened, hand instinctively reaching for his axe before mastering himself. A figure emerged from the gloom at the chamber's edge, cloaked in darkness not merely of cloth, but of presence. "You've been here the whole time, Izdubar?" Hogar asked, jaw tightening as he stared into the hollow gaze of the forsaken rogue. Izdubar's flesh, taut and cracked in places, seemed more artifact than mortal skin. The cowl barely hid the madness that danced in his eyes. Gar chuckled, low and deep, as if pleased by the unease radiating through the room. His gaze never left Balbina, who, to her credit, had not flinched, had not even blinked. "He is always here," Gar said mildly, as if discussing the weather. "He likes to do that. I suppose you could say he guards my flank." His eyes lingered on Balbina with something like amusement. "The world, Miss Greymantle, is full of treachery." "Indeed, my lord," Izdubar rasped, his voice dry as bone dust. He stepped forward, the hem of his tattered cloak trailing like mist across the stone. "Which brings me to my point. Do you truly intend to let that one walk free?" Gar turned without answering, moving toward the tall window that framed the shining heart of Dalaran, its arcane towers glittering against the sunlit sky. The view overlooked the gardens of Elordan, where magical flora bloomed in impossible colors, and fountains whispered secrets only the wind could hear. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, slowly, "I believe Lee has earned that, hasn't he? Not long ago you all considered him a comrade, did you not?" There was no warmth in his tone, only weariness.
To be fair, my lord. Balbina's voice rang out across the silence, cool, composed, unexpected. I have heard of this Lee. His legend precedes him. The oldest of your ranks, save yourself, once your right hand. All eyes turned to her. She met them evenly. That history, however admirable, also makes him a liability. Forgive me, my lord, but a man with knowledge of your inner workings, your alliances, your hidden operations, a man who walks away unsatisfied, is that a risk you can afford to let loose?
Gar's shoulders tensed. A flicker of annoyance crossed his brow. But there was something else beneath it. Doubt. Balbina saw it and twisted the knife.
It is noble, truly, to honor friendship, my lord. But resentment is a seed that thrives in proud hearts, and time is fertile ground. You speak of treachery, my lord. What if the greatest betrayal is yet to come? Not from a stranger, but from the friend you refused to mistrust.
The room chilled. Mahim looked away. Hogar's brow furrowed, and Izdubar grinned. "That snake must die," he hissed. His words dripped with venom, and the sheer force of his hatred seemed to darken the chamber itself. "Allow me, my lord. Let me do it properly, permanently." He stepped forward, then slowly turned his head toward Balbina. His movements were stiff, jerking slightly, as though some invisible force barely held him in check. "I never," he said, his eyes narrowing into gleaming slits, madness cloaked in sanity. "I never liked that one." The towers of Gromgol shimmered in the dying light of dusk, their jagged silhouettes bleeding into the horizon like ancient sentinels. Lee stood at the edge of the camp, his gaze fixed on the emerald sea, where the sun had all but drowned beneath the waves. He hadn't come here by choice. The sharp cries of alarm had drawn him, urgent, desperate. A young troll, barely more than a boy, had run to him breathless, pleading for help. Alliance thugs were at it again, prowling the marketplace like wolves, harassing the merchants who barely scraped by in this embattled corner of Stranglethorn. It wasn't the first time. The Alliance, especially the humans, never came alone. Packs of them, always in numbers, descended upon the camp like carrion birds. To them, anything not human was a beast, subhuman less. And such depersonalization gave them license to steal, to burn, even to kill, without remorse, without hesitation. Lee had known this truth for some time, but witnessing it again only deepened the scar. The Alliance, for all their shining armor and battle hymns, had no honor. Yes, they won more often than not. The tide of war had shifted over the years, slowly and cruelly. Lee had watched the ground beneath the Horde's boots slip away, inch by inch. The Vale, once red with the banners of Unitex and the feared Warbringers, an elite warband now only remembered in whispers, was being consumed by the creeping advance of the Alliance. Their forces, ironclad and methodical, infested the land. Yet even in their dominance, they lacked something vital, a soul, a code, a conscience. They had no honor. Lee whispered it to himself like a vow. And for that, they would remain his eternal enemy. His eyes dropped to the plaza's cracked red earth. A human paladin, a smug-faced brute, was laughing, the sound cold and mirthless as he smashed barrels of food with his hammer. The troll merchants watched helplessly, fury in their eyes, but fear chaining their limbs. A fire lit in Lee's chest, sudden and primal. Most days he was composed, quiet, courteous, but raw injustice awakened something in him, something tenebrous. His mind slipped into that dark, familiar place, a void of violent clarity. Emotion drained from him, leaving only purpose. His blood burned, not with rage, but with something sharper. He became a weapon, not man, not beast, emptiness, a mechanism. And in that moment, the world blurred around him. Lee vanished in a whisper. The paladin never saw it coming. One moment he was laughing, reveling in the petty destruction of a troll's livelihood. The next, agony bloomed through his body as blades found flesh, sharp, cruel, and unforgiving. The laughter died in his throat, replaced by a strangled cry as pain seized him like a vice. But he was trained, forged in the light. Instinct took over. Rogue. Only a rogue struck like that. From the shadows, swift and silent, a ghost with knives. He summoned his holy shields, golden light flaring around him. But a heartbeat had already passed, a moment too long. Blood flowed freely now, torn from his body by serrated blades laced with venom. His muscles burned, his balance faltered. Even with his shields intact, the poisons clung to his veins, draining him from within. Where was the bastard? He spun, vision blurring. The towers of Gromgul doubled and split in his sight, as though reality itself mocked him. Panic coiled in his chest. His breath came in short, frantic bursts. He was afraid. Light, forgive me, he thought. I should never have come here. The rogue wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even a man. He was a demon. The paladin's thoughts spiraled. Who was this shadow? Where was he? And why, by all the light, had he not landed a single blow in return? Because there was no target to strike. Only empty air and the sting of invisible blades. Rogues, scoundrels, unfair, supernatural tricksters that bent the rules of war. This isn't right, he thought. This isn't even possible. He turned to flee. He had to. His friends were nearby, close enough to regroup, to retaliate. He just needed to. Steel screamed again. The rogue reappeared behind him, and pain lanced through his back like a bolt of fire. The paladin knew, with grim certainty, that he was only moments from death. In desperation, he called upon the light one final time. Hand of protection. The divine shield snapped into place, encasing him in radiance. Nothing could touch him now, not for 5 precious seconds. He wheeled around, breath heaving, and summoned his charger. The warhorse appeared in a burst of light and flame, hooves pounding the red earth. I am not dying today, he snarled, arrogance bleeding back into his voice. He spurred the beast forward and galloped away from the smoking remains of Gromgul. He even managed a bitter laugh. Paladins were the chosen, the holy warriors of Azeroth. There was a reason his kind were feared and respected. His confidence surged. He'd return with allies. They would burn this place to ash. The rogue wouldn't survive next time. But then, he stopped. So did his horse. In front of his horse he saw the silhouette of a rogue, a dark silhouette against the blazing sky. He stood there, more vision than reality. Unstealthed. Impossible. How had he outrun a mounted paladin?
How had he gotten ahead? The answer never came, only realization. His shield was gone, the magic spent. Another 7 minutes before it could be called again. And then the rogue vanished. The paladin's eyes widened in shock. His lips parted in a soundless curse. He turned his gaze toward the horizon one last time, where the sun bled into the sea like a wound. A final breath, a farewell. Then he died. Dismissed, Gar said, his voice solemn, though tinged with the dull edge of fatigue. The others began to file out of the chamber without hesitation, but then... Ah, Balbina? She paused, one foot still forward, her brow arching in mild surprise. Turning back, she inclined her head with practiced grace.
Yes, sir?
Would you stay a moment? Balbina bowed slightly, then halted her step. The last of the others exited, the heavy door closing with a quiet thud behind them. Gar moved slowly to the window, clasping his hands behind his back as he stared out into the shifting golden light. For a time he said nothing. Finally, without turning, he spoke. Tell me, do you by any chance hail from the desert lands beyond Ajara?
Balbina blinked. Well, yes, sir, I do. How did you know that?
Your name, he said with a low voice. Balbina. Are you aware of its significance?
She frowned thoughtfully. I can't say that I am.
There is a tribe in those harsh, unforgiving lands, Gar began, his tone darkening. They worship a god, Baal, and his consort, Tanit. Balbina tilted her head, puzzled yet intrigued. A god of fire and blood, Gar continued. Merciless and absolute, he demands many things of his followers. Their obedience, their loyalty. Sometimes, he turned his head slightly, his gaze finding her. Their sacrifices.
Balbina narrowed her eyes. Don't all gods?
Gar gave the faintest smile, without humor. Baal asks for more. A silence stretched between them. Human or elf sacrifice, he said at last.
Balbina drew in a sharp breath. Surely not.
There are whispers, Gar interrupted gently, that in times of desperation, when drought and war ravage the land, Baal demands the ultimate offering. He paused. Balbina stared at him, her lips parted, but no sound emerging. Their children, he said. A chill swept through her, despite the sun beyond the window. And your name, Gar finished quietly. Balbina, beloved of Baal. Gar, the undead warlock, sat hunched in his high-backed chair, cloaked in the deep shadows of his private chamber in Dalaran. His bones ached with more than just the chill of undeath. Weariness pressed on him like lead. So much had happened, too much, and the burdens of leadership weighed upon him like a crown of iron thorns. Heavy lies the crown, he mused grimly, the flickering light of a lone arcane lantern casting jagged shadows across his parchment-coloured face. The sudden, jarring clack of heavy boots striking marble shattered his reverie. In an instant, Gar's hand moved to the staff propped beside him, reflex born of centuries of caution. But when the crimson-robed herald appeared in the doorway, breathless and wide-eyed, Gar merely waved him in with a terse flick of his skeletal fingers. "My lord," the herald said without preamble, his voice taut with urgency. "Grave news. Orgrimmar is under siege.
We've just received word. The raiders have looted our headquarters. For a moment, the world stilled. Then Gar's bony fist slammed onto the oaken desk with a crack like thunder. His crimson eyes flared. Do we know who it was? Not confirmed, my lord, but all whispers point to the Gantz Guild. Of course. Gar leaned back, his jaw tight. It could be no one else. The feud between Unit X and Gantz had escalated for months, clashes flaring across the Eastern Kingdoms in a bitter struggle for dominance. But this was more than a skirmish. The fall of their Orgrimmar base was not just an affront, it was a declaration of war, a threat to everything Unit X had built. They've gone too far, Gar hissed. This cannot go unanswered. Guard, he shouted. Summon the council. At once. It didn't take long for the elders to assemble, the chamber filled with the murmurs of gathering power and ill-contained rage. Mahim entered first, scowling as though someone had ruined a perfectly prepared feast. Hogar followed, arms crossed, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Balbina arrived last, serene as always, her expression a mask. I assume you all know why you're here, Gar began, his voice low, taut. Yes, my lord, they answered almost as one. They will pay, growled Hogar. I swear it. I'll see to it myself. Hold your wrath, Hogar, Gar interjected sharply. Retaliation is inevitable, but haste will only serve our enemies. Precision is what we need. He turned, addressing each in turn. Hogar, go to your allies among the Orc tribes. We need numbers. Whether warriors, mercenaries, or militia, gather them, all of them. With pleasure, my lord, Hogar said. Mahim, go to the Undercity. Speak to your gifted acquaintances among the priests. There are dark magics we will need, subtle tools. Mahim's lips curled into something close to a smile. Consider it done, my lord. Gar's eyes flicked toward the shadows. Izdubar, he said. From the gloom, the forsaken rogue emerged as if conjured by the word alone, and bent to one knee. His presence was unsettling as ever, ghost-like, whisper silent. I need your kin. Go to your base. Mobilize them. My lord, Izdubar said, his voice like falling ash. If I may, what of Lee? At once, Gar's calm shattered. I told you, he thundered. Lee is not to be touched. That matter does not concern you. Do I make myself clear? Certainly, my lord, Izdubar murmured, bowing lower. Then go, all of you. I want updates within the day. Move swiftly. We no longer have the luxury of time. His voice cut like a blade through the chamber. Balbina, stay. The others departed without a word, their footsteps fading into silence. Alone now, Gar let out a long, ragged sigh, folding his hands across his chest as he turned to the only one who remained. I have a task for you, Balbina, one that calls for cleverness. Are you ready?
She inclined her head slightly. Always, my lord.
Good. He leaned forward, his eyes piercing. You must go to Stranglethorn Vale. I want you to find the rogue known as Lee. He paused deliberately, watching her reaction. She remained composed, but Gar noted the faintest shift in her posture. A flicker of uncertainty, perhaps.
Balbina blinked. Speak with him, my lord?
Gar stood now, pacing, his voice low, conspiratorial. These are desperate times. Our vengeance must be not only swift, but unforgettable. I have the makings of a grand design, but one piece remains out of place, one wild card. He turned to face her fully. Lee. The chaos he commands, the savagery in his strikes, he is unlike any other, and I need that chaos to blind our enemies while we strike from the front with power.
Belbina's brow furrowed. Her curiosity sparked. What would I say to him?
The skirmish at Gromgol had earned Lee the understandable gratitude of the troll merchants, a gesture he found pleasing. They approached him with the weight of years in their eyes and a box in their hands, its silver contents the sum of a long and difficult history. They asked him to deliver it to Booty Bay and offered a reward, not lavish, but meaningful. He had accepted. Deliveries like these were something he did once in a while. The road to Booty Bay was infamous for its dangers, ambushes by jungle beasts, lurking pirates, and worse. Only fighters of proven strength were trusted with such things, for any who bore cargo like this were tempting targets to the scavengers who prowled the land like vultures. Lee, of course, was more than capable, but he had not accepted more than the standard fee, despite the troll's insistence. The merchants were not rich. They scraped and saved, and Lee had no desire to bleed them dry. After all, he was not a member of the Alliance. Still, the trip gave him time to think. There were moments, quiet, unsettling moments, when Lee wondered if there were truly two versions of himself. The man who moved through the world with cool composure, handling contracts, completing missions, keeping his distance. And then, the other one, the killer. That thing inside him that awakened during battle, silent, focused, merciless, when it took over. Everything else faded. Sound, thought, feeling. He moved without memory, reacted without choice. And when the haze lifted, when blood cooled on his blades and corpses lay still around him, he sometimes could not remember what he had done, only that he had done it with frightening ease. Where had it come from? That fury, that consuming silence. Once, long ago, he had been alive, a man of flesh and blood, a man with a name spoken by someone who loved him. But that life was gone. Ripped from him by powers he could not remember, his soul warped and twisted by the cursed fell energies of the Burning Legion. He had been reshaped, reanimated, not reborn, no. There was no life in undeath, only movement, only will. He had no memory of how he had died, or who he had been before the grave. All he knew was that he had awoken in a tomb in Tirisful Glades. One of many. Just another corpse raised from the dirt, dressed in rags, cloaked in rage. That rage, it had been there from the start, burning in his gut, crawling beneath his skin like a second soul. Was that what was left of him now? Was that all he was? Sometimes, in the dead hours of night, Lee wished he had never awakened at all, that whatever demon had raised him had passed him by, that he had stayed dead and silent and forgotten. But fate had not been kind, and neither was the world. So he walked, he fought, he delivered silver to Booty Bay, and did not ask for more than was fair. And when battle came again, and it always did, he would become what the world had made him. Screams stirred her from the depths, but she could not wake. Something held her fast, bound not by chains, but by a force older than memory. Mist curled around her, whispering secrets in a tongue she couldn't understand. Slowly, it began to shift, parting like a veil drawn back by unseen hands. Shapes emerged, massive, ancient. Monoliths? No, ruins. Though the stones still stood jagged and defiant against the sky, time had gnawed at their edges. The architecture was alien, its purpose lost to the ages. Great blocks formed impossible angles, as if built to offend logic itself. They meant nothing, and yet everything. A city lay ahead, or what had once been a city. Now it loomed like a corpse too long in the sun. Then the screams came again. Closer now, urgent. She turned, or perhaps was turned, toward the sound. A hill rose before her, cloaked in the same shifting fog. At its peak, something emerged. A temple. It loomed like a memory half remembered, drawing nearer not by her steps but by some invisible force. She was gliding mere inches above the ground. The temple pulsed closer. The cries grew louder. Men, women, children. Her skin prickled. A cold sweat slicked her body, her breath shallow, her chest heaving as though each breath might be her last. Her blood turned to ice, as the rhythm of drums began to echo from within the temple's heart. Her hips moved against her will, swaying to the relentless beat. Her bare breasts, covered in sweat, heaved, her legs parted and twitched. She could only watch. The great temple doors groaned open. She gasped. Faces, dozens of them, hundreds, turned. They lined the massive chamber, standing shoulder to shoulder. Men and women, dressed in the simple clothes of merchants, artisans, housewives and husbands. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. They all wore the same face. That same grotesque, grinning face. Not a smile of joy, but a rictus. Fixed, eternal, hideous. The crowd parted before her. A path opened toward a dais at the far end of the chamber, raised high above the others. Upon it stood a robed figure, arms outstretched before a colossal idol, something demonic, something divine. Its maw gaped wide, flame flickering from within, licking at the stone like a tongue eager to taste. Other priests flanked the central figure, each masked in that same cruel grin. The high priest held a dagger, twisted and wrong, almost alive in his hand. In the other, a child. Screaming, thrashing, and now she saw them. The floor was not stone, but flesh. Children, dozens, maybe more, strewn across the ground like discarded offerings, silent, still. The priests towered above them. A scream built in her throat, rising like a tide too great to hold back, but no sound escaped. Balbina's mouth stretched in a silent cry of horror, and in that instant, she awoke. Isdubar stirred within the gloom of his chamber, if such a place could be granted so generous a term. Nestled beneath the desolate bones of the forsaken encampment in Northrend, it was more crypt than quarters, more tomb than sanctuary. The scent of decay clung to the stone, and shadows pulled thick in every corner like secrets left to rot. He had just completed the grim preparations. Soon, his forsaken kin would march to join the assembled units, those mustering for a decisive strike against the Alliance Guild known as Gantz. The air was thick with anticipation, and Izdubar, for his part, was not displeased. According to his calculations, and he trusted none more than his own mind, Gar was preparing to make a statement, a bold, ruthless statement that would send tremors through the very heart of the Alliance. Stormwind. And yet, for all his strategic satisfaction, bitterness gnawed at his hollow chest. There was another task, one far more personal and infinitely more loathsome. The elimination of the rogue called Lee. The memory of that day still festered like a wound left to suppurate. The shame, the sneers, the public humiliation in front of the entire guild. He could see their faces, feel the burn of their scorn as though it were yesterday. Izdubar had not forgotten. He would never forget. His fingers curled, claw-like, against the stone sill of the narrow window. But no amount of hatred could loosen the magical noose wound tightly about his will. None knew of it, save one, Gar. The warlock's grip upon him was more than political. It was arcane, a geas, binding his very actions in chains of spellcraft. He could not defy him. He could not rebel.
Balbina's journey towards Stranglethorn had been, in outward appearances, calm and uneventful. The skies were clear, the jungle winds gentle. But within her, a tempest raged. Her thoughts refused to settle, swirling in restless currents behind her eyes. That dream still clung to her like damp silk, unnerving and persistent. Its imagery, strange and half-remembered, refused to fade. What did it mean? What had it tried to show her? And always there was Gar. The warlock's presence haunted her thoughts as much as the dream itself. His crimson gaze seemed to pierce veils, to unearth secrets even she had not yet uncovered within herself. There was something dreadful about him. No, not dreadful, terrifying. And yet, despite her growing unease, she could not stop thinking about him, about his power, his reach, his command. The more she turned her mind toward Unit X, once her bright ambition, the more tarnished it seemed beneath the shadow Gar cast. The thrill of ascending through its ranks had once been sweet. Now it tasted of ash and cold steel. Still, there was intrigue, and that intrigued her. She wanted to understand, to know. She was hungry, not only for influence, but for knowledge, for the truths that lay buried beneath the surface of things. And there was another name that tugged at her curiosity like a loose thread, waiting to unravel a tapestry. Lee, the rogue, elusive, dangerous, whispered about in the circles she monitored. The tension between him and Gar wasn't merely personal. It was a fault line. And Balbina had the sense that, if she followed it long enough, something would break open. Something was seething. She had spared no expense in securing a swift flight from Gromgal to Booty Bay. The cost was worth every coin to bypass the tedium and peril of the southern roads. Her network of informants, aided by her generously opened coin purse, had painted a fairly clear picture. Lee had been sighted near Booty Bay. If the rumors held true, she was close. As the wind whipped against her leathers and the landscape blurred beneath the beating wings of the wyvern, she leaned forward slightly, peering ahead. There, on the horizon, loomed the peculiar silhouette of that garish gnome statue. arms stretched skyward in exaggerated welcome. It marked the entrance to Booty Bay, and with it, perhaps, the beginning of the answers she sought. Lee stood at the edge of the rooftop, his gaze sweeping over the rust-colored tiles of Booty Bay. From this vantage, the entire settlement resembled a horseshoe bent around the jagged coastline, its docks groaning under the weight of trade, its alleys pulsing with the hum of gold and danger. The gnomes who ran the place, unintentionally comedic, their voices chirped, their gestures exaggerated, their posture forever teetering between mockery and mechanical precision. But Lee, ever the pragmatist, knew better than to underestimate them. Booty Bay's gnomish authority clung to its prized neutrality with the force of iron shackles. Within these borders, Horde and Alliance stood as unwilling bedfellows, forced to coexist under threat of swift and often humiliating retribution. The gnome guards may have looked absurd with their oversized goggles and stubby legs, but they moved with eerie speed, descending in coordinated packs at the first sign of violence. Nets that paralyzed even the fiercest warriors, alarm traps, pulsing arcane beams. Booty Bay did not tolerate chaos lightly. A single misstep could turn a mischief maker into a marked man. Prices would skyrocket for offenders, merchants would turn cold-eyed and silent, and for the truly foolish, a standing kill-on-sight order would be issued. But for one such as Lee, steeped in shadows, patient as stone, there were always loopholes. He knew the rooftops better than most, knew which ones offered a blind spot, which corners could shield a sudden disappearance. And if the strike was quick, precise, he could dispatch a target before the guards even understood that something had happened. He had done it before, more than once, and it never got old watching the baffled expressions of the guards as they questioned the dazed victims. "What happened to you, sir?" "Well, I don't rightly know, friends. I think I tripped." Today, Lee had just finished his delivery. He had time to kill. It seemed the red-tiled roofs of Booty Bay were made for rogues, spacious, elevated, offering a perfect view of the unwitting below. And then he spotted one. A priest, green as spring grass, wandering the alleyways, clearly lost. The mark radiated vulnerability, ripe for a lesson in humility. Lee shifted into position, the dance of instinct stirring within him, his muscles tensed. Until a flicker of color, a presence, a blood elf girl strolled into view, graceful and confident, with raven dark hair tumbling over her shoulders and an ostentatiously regal blue bird perched at her side. A hunter, clearly, but not just any. She moved with the practiced poise. She approached the priest, said something with a smile, but her eyes, sharp, calculating, were already scanning the rooftops. Lee was intrigued. Her gaze swept the skyline carelessly, and for one exhilarating moment, he was certain she was looking at him. Then she waved, not at the priest, broadly, as though saluting the entire city. With a playful tilt of her head, she placed her hands on her hips and arched an eyebrow. Lee smirked. Whoever she was, she had flair. He couldn't resist. With a flicker of shadow, he stepped behind the priest, emerging from stealth just inches away. The poor man squealed, leaping as though struck by lightning. From below, the elf burst into laughter, a warm, rich sound, intelligent and fearless. The kind of laugh that belonged to someone entirely at ease, even here.
"Well," she said, her voice melodic and amused. "Consider me your lucky charm, dear priest. It seems you may just live to see another sunrise." The priest blinked at her, bewildered, then turned and bolted down the alley like a startled deer. The girl turned her gaze upward once more, eyes locking with Lee's. "Balbina," she said, sweeping into a mock bow. Balbina Greypeak. At your service. A sly smile tugged at her lips. I assume you're Lee.
Lee listened in silence, sifting through the woman's words with the precision of a blade cutting grain from chaff. He caught gist of it: full reinstatement into the guild, a restored seat on the council, and a generous sum of gold. A clever move by Gar, Lee thought, sending a pretty envoy to deliver his pitch. And the offer did hold weight. The money would help. The guild's protection would make life easier, and the prestige, well, it would lift him from the shadows, let him walk unstealthed in places where now he crept like a criminal. No more skulking, no more second glances. But the truth was as hard as it was simple. He had outgrown the guild. Lee was weary of its endless posturing, its tangled web of obligations and whispered power plays, tired of politics. Now he lived for himself. He made enough to scrape by, but every coin was earned on his own terms. He answered to no one, and that liberty, that raw, unchained existence, it was priceless. The woman's voice droned on, polished and practiced, though her words had long since lost meaning. At last, Lee raised a hand, palm open like a blade in the air. She faltered, mid-sentence, her words dissolving like mist. "I've heard enough," Lee said, his tone quiet but resolute. "Thank you for your message, miss." He leaned forward slightly, a glimmer of mischief in his eyes. "Now," he said with a grin, "take out your notebook. I have a message for Gar." The woman blinked, clearly unaccustomed to being interrupted. Lee enjoyed her discomfort.
Certainly, she replied, recovering quickly, though her fingers fumbled with the clasp of her satchel. I'd be happy to deliver your words to the guild master.
"Yes, you deliver them to your guild master," Lee said. Then, with slow deliberation, "Tell him I am a friend of virtue, not of fortune. Non serviam." She scribbled the words down, but confusion darkened her brow.
So, is that a no? She asked, her voice small, uncertain.
"He will understand," Lee replied. He turned to leave. And then, a whisper. A breath of air too subtle to be wind brushed against his face. Lee froze. His eyes snapped to hers. She felt it too, her head tilted slightly, a silent question in the furrow of her brow. In less than a heartbeat, steel flashed in the dim light. Lee's twin daggers were out, his stance low and lethal, knees bent, blades reversed. Balbina stumbled back, eyes wide, breath stolen from her throat by the impossible speed of his movement. Before them, the shimmer of illusion began to melt away. Words burned in the air, like smoke carved by a cruel hand. "It is time to die." Then the form of an undead rogue shimmered into view, emerging like a phantom from the veil. Balbina gasped, her composure crumbling. She fumbled for her bow, hands clumsy in panic, but Lee remained still, his eyes locked on the figure before him. "Izdubar," he said, voice calm, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Good to see you, old friend." Without a sound, Izdubar vanished from sight, a whisper of movement, a flicker of presence behind him, then crack. The sap struck Lee squarely on the back of the head. His body froze, muscles locking tight, though his mind remained alert. He allowed the strike, his instincts calculating, his focus narrowing. Izdubar was true to form. Predictable as ever, he reappeared behind Lee, striking again. Cheap shot. Another stun, another pause in Lee's movement. 3 more seconds stolen. Then came the rhythm of the assault. Blades danced against Lee's armor, slicing in rapid, relentless succession,
slice and dice a flurry not meant to kill outright, but to bleed him slow. The wounds were shallow, but their effect multiplied. 1,000 cuts, if left unchecked, would prove fatal. Lee knew the tactic well, the infamous stun lock, the bread and butter of rogues across Azeroth. It required perfect timing, every incapacitation chained together so flawlessly that the victim remained helpless throughout. A technique as effective as it was rigid. To Lee, it lacked artistry. It was cold, mechanical, unforgiving, brutally efficient. He hated it. The damage was insignificant for now. His armor, meticulously earned over years of brutal campaigns, absorbed the worst of it, but he would bleed eventually. Even the strongest walls could fall to siege. He bided his time, every nerve honed, waiting for a mistake, like a spider caught in trap. And yet, it did not come. Izdubar had grown sharper, faster, more exacting. There were no gaps in the rhythm, no misplaced stuns, no breathing room. Lee hadn't landed a single counterblow, and his life force was beginning to wither. The smirk on Izdubar's pale face widened, and through Lee's haze of pain he caught the gleam of rotted teeth, a grin that taunted him. Behind them, Balbina had risen, bow half raised in trembling hands. Her eyes, wide with horror, flicked between the two combatants. But Izdubar, still mid-assault, didn't even look at her. "Keep out of it, wench," he growled, voice flat with malice. She backed away, uncertain. Lee's frustration began to mount. He had one move won, a fail-safe trinket that could break the stuns and set him free. But timing was everything. If he used it too soon, an experienced rogue could reset the lock. The cycle would begin again, and next time there would be no escape. Still, his strength was failing, and Izdubar knew it. The undead let out a low, unhinged chuckle, confidence surging in his decaying frame. Another strike, another cut. Lee's vision pulsed, his knees buckled. Izdubar laughed louder now, giddy in victory. "One more," he whispered, "just one more." He raised his arm with full fury. He plunged the dagger into Lee's chest. And nothing happened. No blood, no gasp of pain, only silence. Izdubar blinked, confused. His eyes widened, a doubt. A single moment of doubt. A moment too long. Lee released his trinket and vanished, then reappeared behind Izdubar in a burst of impossible speed. His blade sang through the air. Shadow dance, the true rogue's vengeance. The flurry was surgical, insanely powerful, precise. Each cut roared with suppressed fury, his daggers cleaving through Izdubar's armor like paper. A garrote silenced the undead's scream. A rupture tore open his abdomen, spilling blood like a crimson waterfall. Izdubar staggered, gasping, his eyes wild. "No!" he bellowed, whirling in fury, now facing his attacker. But Lee was already gone, vanished again, into the shadows. With the strength of the desperate, Izdubar furiously sliced at open air as if he was fighting invisible demons. Useless. There was nothing to slice. The rogue's body bled horribly. Deep, festering wounds spread across his torso, his back, his throat. The garrote wound strangled each breath. The rupture gushed with every heartbeat. It made no sense.
He had been winning. He had won. And then Lee appeared again. Ambush racked Izdubar once again. The final blow, eviscerate, landed with the force of a thunderclap, sending Izdubar flying. He slammed against a tree with bone-cracking force. Gasping, he staggered to his feet, trying to crouch into a defense, but Lee was gone again. A shimmer of light marked the burst of nitro rocket boots, propelling him into the distance with blinding speed. All Izdubar could do was watch. His vision wavered. Blood blurred his sight. He tried to lift a hand to wipe it away, but his hand did not obey. The world tilted. Then the ground rose to meet him. And then, fast, swallowed him into oblivion. Moments later, as Izdubar's body lay still, a crimson pool spread beneath him like a dark halo, seeping into the cracked soil. A few paces away, Lee sat cross-legged, wrapping bandages around his wounds with the precision of a practiced soldier. Every so often he drank deeply from a vial of shimmering potion, the glow of healing magic flickering faintly against his skin. Balbina stood nearby, frozen. Her mouth hung slightly open, her eyes wide with disbelief as she looked down at the victor of the savage duel. For a moment words failed her, then,
How did you do that? She asked, her voice low, raw with awe. It's as if you didn't plan to survive at all.
Lee didn't look up. He simply tied the last strip of cloth around his forearm, then flexed his fingers to test the tension. At last he spoke, his voice calm, almost distant, as though he were teaching a lesson to a child rather than reflecting on a mortal battle just fought. "Each battle, Miss Balbina," he said, "is one you must be willing to die in. That is the price. This is Azeroth. They don't call it the world of Warcraft for nothing." Balbina lowered her eyes, her posture softening.
Indeed, she murmured reverently. I see now why Gar wants you on our side.
Lee said nothing. He stood smooth and silent, like a shadow uncoiling from the earth. Without looking at her, he offered a half salute, 2 fingers to his brow. "See you around," he said, and then he vanished. No puff of smoke, no flash of light, just gone. A beat passed in the heavy silence. Then chaos returned. The ground trembled with the sudden stampede of heavy boots. A dozen or more gnome guards swarmed the area, their armor clanking, voices barking.
"What going is here?"
shouted one, whose helmet was so absurdly oversized it bobbled on his head with each step. Balbina blinked, pulled from her daze. She looked at the corpse, at the blood, and then up at the absurdity of the gnomish officer. And for the first time in a long while, she smiled.
He said, and I quote, Balbina announced, producing a worn notebook from the folds of her cloak. She flipped it open with practiced precision, then read aloud, her tone half incredulous, half mocking. I am a friend of virtue, not of fortune. Non serviam. She looked up sharply. What in the 9 hells is that supposed to mean?
Gar leaned back slightly, clasping his chin with one gloved hand. A low, thoughtful chuckle escaped him, more shadow than mirth. "I see," he murmured. There was a moment's pause, deliberately drawn out, as though he were waiting for something.
perhaps for her to connect the dots. When she didn't, he exhaled and spoke again. His voice laced with something between condescension and melancholy. "It comes from the old scriptures," he said at last, his gaze sharpening, searching her face for reaction. Balbina met his eyes without flinching. Unmoved, Gar continued, now with the bored cadence of a man repeating an old story, one he'd told too many times to too many fools. "When the archangel Michael stood before Lucifer, then still resplendent, not yet the accursed one, he asked him why. Why had he cast away glory and splendor? Why reject the Lord of light, only to be banished from the heavens?" He paused, and for a moment the room felt colder. "Immortal I am. The years have not troubled me. 1,000 offspring struggle against tyranny. A spring is a spring for the earth. I have never retreated. I was born through you, and you through me. I will not serve."
How, by all the light, do you even know all this crap? Balbina asked, incredulous.
To her surprise, Gar threw back his head and laughed, a full, booming sound that echoed off the cold stone walls of the chamber. It was not the dry, sardonic chuckle she had come to expect from him, but a deep, almost joyful bellow. For a brief, disarming moment, she saw the man behind the mask. Older, perhaps, but not entirely hollowed out. Caught off guard, she found herself smiling. Gar wiped at one eye, still grinning. "Study, Miss Balbina. I suppose I'm just a sucker for knowledge," he said with mock solemnity. But as swiftly as the mirth had come, it vanished. His expression shuttered, hardening once more into grim lines. It was as though the laughter had never happened. "Now," he said, voice low and clipped, "tell me about the duel." Balbina blinked. "I thought I had that wretch under control," Gar muttered, more to himself than to her. "But I suppose even magic has its limits." Unsure of his meaning, she began to recount the events, hesitant at first, then more fluently, compelled by the weight in his gaze. She told him everything. Each detail fell from her lips like drops of ink on parchment. When she finished, silence reigned. Gar said nothing for a long time. He simply stood, arms crossed, eyes lost in thought. Then, finally, he turned toward her, his voice flat and final. "Well," he said, "I suppose we'll just have to make do without him, won't we?" They marched beneath a moonless sky, shadows moving through deeper shadows, 20 strong, elite, hardened, the finest combatants that Unit X could field. Each step was precise, measured. There was no idle chatter, no rustle of nervous armor, only purpose. At their head strode Gar, a grim silhouette against the darkness, his silence as heavy as the weapons they bore. A quiet fire smouldered in his eyes, cold, relentless determination. Around him moved warriors of varying ilk, stoic, orcish veterans clad in darkened mail, towering knights whose oaths had long since faded into bloodlust, and among them the silent ranks of the Forsaken, the undead priests and the shadowy rogues, once under the infamous Izdubar, had been reassigned. By Gar's command they now answered to Mahim, the war-hardened strategist who spoke little and saw much. Hogar, fierce and proud, led the orc warriors, his authority unchallenged. As for the mages and warlocks, they followed Gar himself. Their boots whispered across the soft loam of Elwyn Forest, avoiding patrols with near preternatural precision. Ahead lay the river, its slow-moving waters marking the invisible but unyielding border of Alliance territory, Stormwind's domain. Northward, Goldshire stood as a modest outpost, the first shield of the mighty human capital. But Gar had no intention of knocking on Stormwind's front door. As they neared the border, he signaled silently. The column veered east, toward the rugged mountains that loomed beyond the trees, natural bastions that overlooked the heart of the city. Goldshire would remain untouched by their hands. That task belonged to another. Behind them, hidden in the forest's deeper pockets, a second force lay in wait, 50 strong, a militia of mercenaries and wildcards, orcish blades for hire, deserters and blood-drunken sellswords, all rallied by Hogar's promise of coin and carnage. Their mission was simple: draw eyes, draw steel, draw blood. Goldshire would burn, its cries echoing through Stormwind's gates. It was the bait. The true strike would come from the peaks, from the dark places no one watched. For Gar's aim was not mere slaughter, it was retribution. The annihilation of the Gantz enclave hidden within Stormwind's walls, a blow delivered in vengeance for the obliteration of Unit X's headquarters in Orgrimmar. Gar did not forgive, he did not forget. Only when his unit had secured the high ground, only then would the order be given for the assault on Goldshire. Until that moment, they were phantoms in the woods, biding their time, their blades sheathed, their bloodlust sealed behind clenched jaws. The river was crossed. Still, not a word passed between them. They moved as one, bound by a shared thirst, not for glory, not for riches, but for the lifeblood of the Alliance, for the ruin of Gantz. Hatred had shaped them, loss had honed them, and vengeance was the name that echoed in every heartbeat. Unit X marched for war. The mountain base was reached without incident. The few guards, unfortunate enough to cross their path, met swift and silent deaths, struck down in the dark by the forsaken rogues, their blades singing death without a whisper. No alarm was raised, no blood spilled beyond what was necessary. The mountain remained still, unaware of the storm gathering upon its slopes. Now it was the priest's time, and the warlocks. Gar raised his arms slowly, a gesture of silent command. "Mahim," he said, his voice a low rumble of authority. "Bring forth the priests." As one, the robed figures stepped forward, flanked by the warlocks whose hands already shimmered with restrained power. They moved with the solemnity of executioners, each knowing their role in the unfolding ritual. Together, they began the casting. It was a simple spell, deceptively so. Featherfall, and its darker cousin, Levitate. Magic not designed to soar, but to drift, to cling. When applied near the base of a cliff, the spell betrayed its true utility, lifting the subject gently along the surface, hugging stone as though gravity itself had been tricked. The spell cared nothing for angles or danger. So long as there was ground beside the wielder, it would carry them up. And up they went. One by one, priests and warlocks raised their comrades from the forest floor, each warrior floating upward like a shadow given wings. They rose along the sheer, craggy face, invisible from below, soundless as breath. Not a single word was spoken. Even Gar, ever the tactician, watched in rare stillness. Then, at last, they reached the summit, the final destination before the attack. And the sight that met them stole the breath from hardened lungs. Before them, sprawled like a jewel nestled in stone, lay Stormwind.
The golden rooftops gleamed in the pale morning light, and the great spires reached skyward like the fingers of some sleeping titan. The city's belly lay exposed, unsuspecting, a lamb stretched out beneath the gaze of wolves. For a moment, there was awe. Even Gar allowed a heartbeat of stillness to mark the beauty of the view, before duty reclaimed him. He raised his arm again. "Rogues," he said, his voice low and flint-edged. "Search!" No sooner had the command been given than the shadows stirred. The Forsaken moved as if one, their forms slipping into the brush and crags, eyes and blades seeking out hermits, shepherds, or any poor soul foolish enough to dwell near the cliffs. There would be no witnesses. Dead men told no tales. As the sun lay sleeping, the camp settled. Quiet conversation, sharpening blades, whispered incantations, preparations made with the calm of soldiers who had danced with death too often to flinch now. When all were rested, when every spell was ready and every weapon hungry, Gar stood, and with him, so did the rest. He looked down upon Stormwind one final time, the quiet city unaware of the retribution poised above it. Then he turned to his warriors, his voice carrying like thunder over stone. "Men," he said, "are you ready?" "Oh!" came the resounding cry, a war-beaten howl of unity, rage, and purpose. Gar smirked. "A good answer." With deliberate grace, he raised 2 fingers to his lips and whispered a spell, not in words, but in thought, in will. A silent thread of arcane command flew from him like a spark in dry tinder, reaching far through the trees. It found its mark. A trusted orc, burly and scarred, Barbas, Hogar's old companion, loyal to the bone. Gar's voice echoed only in the orc's mind. "Barbas, release the dogs." And so it began. Goldshire burned. The mercenaries descended upon it like a pack of starved wolves, teeth bared and blades drawn. Fire lit the sky. Screams tore through the peaceful night. The sleepy guards stationed there were caught off guard, but not so thoroughly that they couldn't sound the alarm. And they did. Magical bells, sharp, crystalline, and unignorable, rang out through every district of Stormwind. One after another, they flared to life with a pulsing glow, calling the city's defenders to arms. It was a sound that had not echoed through those streets in years. War had come to the gates. Within minutes, Stormwind stirred with the wrath of giants. Warriors hastily donned armor, mages summoned fire to their hands. Knights mounted steeds with practiced grace, rogues vanished into shadow. The fury of the Alliance had been roused, and whoever had dared to challenge it would drown in their own blood. Above it all, Gar and his detachment watched. From their cliffside vantage, they observed the unfolding chaos with silent poise. Gar's eyes narrowed at the assembling host, more than 500 strong by his estimate, gathering at Stormwind's main gate. They were swift, efficient, the famed human order in motion. A clarion trumpet blasted across the hills, a haunting, ancient call to arms. Then, thunder, horses, screams. A tide of steel and fury thundered down the southern road toward Goldshire, swift and terrible. Their destination was only minutes away at full gallop. Gar's lips curled in a grim smile. Now, He whispered a single word into the arcane channel linking him to Barbas. The message was concise and absolute. Barbas, disengage, take what you can, flee to the forest. And the thread was cut. Without hesitation, Gar turned to his waiting detachment, his voice rising with rage. He did not give some grand speech. The time for words had passed. The hour of vengeance is upon us. Then he leapt. Just the silent arc of a figure falling into shadow, arms spread, as the Featherfall spell carried his descent like a ghost descending from the heavens. One by one, the detachment followed, silent, deadly. A rain of cloaked shapes, drifting from the mountainside like autumn leaves caught in an unseen wind. Down they fell, into the sleeping belly of Stormwind, into the city whose attention was turned south, into the belly of the beast. Stormwind was nearly empty. The grand avenues, once teeming with bustle and ceremony, now lay hollow. Its defenders lured south like moths to a decoy flame. The few guards that remained were slaughtered within moments. They didn't stand a chance. Gar's detachment swept through the city like a curse, silent, inevitable. And wherever they passed, death followed. There was no distinction made between soldier or civilian. Bloodlust had consumed the raiders, masking their features in feral madness. Their vision was red, their hearts thundered with vengeance. Screams echoed through the alleyways, quickly choked off into silence. Doors were shattered, lives were ended. There was no mercy in their path, only ruin. Then, near the city's main square, the rhythm of slaughter broke. A small group of Alliance soldiers, clearly late to muster, stood in their path, still buckling armor and tightening gauntlets. "Damn," Gar muttered. Steel clashed, spells erupted. The battle was short and cruel, but it had cost them. Gar's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, uncertainty crept in. "We're behind schedule," he hissed, teeth clenched. Then, louder, "With me, now!" They ran, weaving through Stormwind's winding alleys, ghosting past shuttered windows and bloodied thresholds. Gar led with purpose, like a predator scenting prey. His voice was low but firm. "No more killing," he ordered, "not until we reach the target." And then they were there. Just one more turn, one final corner. A squat, unassuming building stood ahead, with a wooden sign swinging from rusted chains above the door. Gantz the Mighty. Gar bared his teeth in a grin. "Come," he growled, "time to feast." The door exploded inward beneath a single kick, but what greeted them was not battle. It was silence, a barren room. No tables, no chairs, no banners, no guards, nothing. The building was empty. The guild was gone. Gar froze in the doorway, the fire in his eyes dimmed to disbelief. "No," he whispered. "No, this cannot be." It took a moment for the horror to reach the others, men so drunk on rage they barely understood the shift. They looked to one another, confused, until the dread settled across them like ash. The guild had been evacuated, moved perhaps. Gar's visage shattered with disbelief. Then a sound. Low at first, then rising. The unmistakable rhythm of hooves. Thunder, screams. Gar's face twisted in fury. "No!" he bellowed. The Alliance army had returned. They were at the gates, perhaps already inside.
Gar turned, his voice a blade.
"Everyone, evacuate at once!"
And they ran, through alleys soaked in blood, past the corpses of their making. Street after street blurred into shadow and flame. At the southwestern edge of the city, a ledge overlooked the river. From there they would leap, slip beneath the surface, and guided by Gar's magic, swim under the walls and vanish into the night. But they never reached it. 10 steps from the edge, they met them, the Alliance vanguard, a tide of shining steel and righteous fury. There was no time for words, no time for plans, only war. Steel met steel, magic screamed through the air, blades flashed, flesh tore, blood flowed in sickening rivers across stone. The detachment fought with desperation, their cohesion shattered, their breath ragged, their numbers decimated, but they fought. Gar, at the center of it all, became a whirlwind of dark magic and blinding fire. His hands moved faster than thought, his voice a litany of destruction. Arcane missiles tore through flesh, shields burst to life to protect allies. The path opened, but it came at a cost. They reached the ledge. The water stirred below. Gar turned once, saw what remained of his force, bloodied, broken, but alive.
"Go!"
He roared. One after another, they leapt into the black water below, the magic of underwater breathing embracing them like a final mercy. Gar was the last to go, falling backward into the depths like a general vanishing into a dream. And then they were gone, swallowed by the abyss. The mission had failed. And at the top of the ramparts, a man clad in paladin's armor, the guildmaster of Gantz, bellowed with laughter as he saw Gar disappear.